Radio Migrante every Sunday night from 9 to 10 p.m. on CHRY 105.5 FM.
Oh my God, I'm singing. Oh, everyone's listening.
Magandang gabi po sa lahat ng nakikinig dito lamang sa inyong Radyo Migrante sa CHRY 105.5 FM, your leading source for diversity. Maaari nyo rin kaming pakinggan sa www.rdo.co/CHRY, Bell 5973, Rogers Digital Cable 945 o sa tunein.com kung may mga smartphones kayo. So, ang makakasama niyo po ngayong gabi ay yung tagapaglikod na si Rhea Gamana, Ish Cabanya at Louie Kianyo. Magandang gabi po sa inyo.
Ay, magandang gabi po sa inyo lahat, sa mga tagapakinig ng Radyo Migrante.
Tingnan nyo.
Narinig nyo, live!
Live.
Si Ish ay kumanta ng tingnan nyo.
Yeah, just to hype us up. Give us energy tonight or this morning in the Philippines. Magandang umaga sa inyo, sa mga nakikinig dyan sa Pilipinas ngayong Lunes ang umaga. Holy Week.
Holy Week. Kapapanalo ng ni Pacquiao, no? Holy Week.
Oh, yes. Kapanalo. Nakapanood ba kayo?
Hindi ako nakapanood dahil nakatulog ako for one. Pero narinig ko sa news at saka sa mga tao na hindi daw masyadong lumabas yung galing at talas ni Pacquiao sa laban niya yesterday compared nung 2009. So I'm not sure what you guys say about this kasi ako hindi ko talaga alam. Yun lang narinig ko ha.
Magic daw si Mami D.
Magic.
Siguro sa mga nakikinig po sa atin ngayon, na pag-uusapan po natin ay tungkol sa human trafficking at saka recruitment. Anong pagkakaiba ng dalawa at kailan nagiging recruitment ang human trafficking at siguro kung maaari ay vice versa, no? So, lumabas po yung migrants report na isinulat ni Faye Faraday na isa pong human rights at saka labor lawyer, and this was released by Metcalf Foundation Tuesday last week at si Amar Batia po ay isa din po sa naging researcher dito sa report ito. So mamaya po makakasama natin si Amar Batia, who is also a visiting professor at the Osgood Hall Law School at saka he's been working also with Migrant Workers Alliance for Change or MWAC. So before we move on to that interview, let's start with the news and information. Sisimulan ko sa clip ng mga tao na nagsalita ukol sa reaksyon dun sa laban ni Manny Pacquiao.
Kaya ano bang masasabi niyo sa pinakitang laban ni Pacquiao?
Ang galing ni Pacquiao, lakas ni Pacquiao, anak, thank you Lord! Si Pacquiao, pinagdasal ko po sa simbahan kanina.
Medyo nagbago yung ni Manny. Hindi katulad nung bata pa siya. Pabilis siya kumilos.
Iba na yung iba yung laro niya. Yung nakalipas na kumbaga, pinag-resting niya, bumalik na eh. Pero nakakaintad na rin kasi si Pacquiao, kaya medyo, hindi natin alam yung kabataan niya. Kung kabataan lang ni Pacquiao, malamang, mga 4 laws na, 3 laws, tulog na yung si Bradley, diba?
At yun lamang po ang mga reaksyon ng mga kababayan natin sa Pilipinas ukol po sa laban ni Pacquiao. Very interesting lang, no? Because it's been a while since napanood ko yung laban ni Pacquiao. So,
And it's been a while too when Filipinos unite.
Kasi punuan yung mga bars, yung mga apartments. Talagang pag may laban si Pacquiao, nandyan lahat yung mga Pilipino nagkatipon dito.
Basta ako, natulog ako. Kasi alam kong baka tulog yung kalaban ni Pacquiao.
Na-knockout ka rin.
Na-knockout din ako.
Yeah. Okay, on a serious note, for our second news, Gabriela, Ontario or Canada releases initial results of live-in caregivers transition study. This is from PhilippineReporter.com. Gabriela, Ontario and its research partners recently released the initial results of a nationwide study about how Pinoy live-in caregivers are transitioning from the live-in caregiver or LCP program. At a workshop held last April 6 at Ryerson University in Toronto, the research team presented the results of the said survey. the purpose of which is to gather statistical and analytical data about how live-in caregivers are moving on after they have fulfilled the 2-year requirement under the LCP. Key cities that were surveyed include the Greater Toronto Area, Vancouver, Montreal, Calgary, Ottawa, and Edmonton. Community organizations at the Gates workshops were Binadang Migrante Gabriela Ontario, Filipino Migrant Workers Movement, Community Alliance for Social Justice, Pinay Quebec, and PMSC or Filipino-Migrante sa Canada. Survey data revealed that almost half of the survey respondents are still in caregiving-related jobs, even though the respondents have already finished the LCP. Asked for their current occupation in Canada, many of the respondents said they are child care workers, nannies, daycare workers, and babysitters. About 1/10 of the respondents said that they are in sales and customer service jobs. Others are in the healthcare industry as healthcare aides and community support workers. The research team has yet to completely analyze the statistical data, but one of the themes discussed at the data analysis workshop last April 6 is why former live-in caregivers are still in caregiving-related jobs. Fiel Salazar, a member of Pinay Quebec, a Montreal-based Filipino migrants group, said there are several factors why caregivers in the province are struggling, with many issues even after they have hurdled the LCP program. She noted that even though some of the caregivers have other skills acquired in the Philippines or Canada to help them jump onto other challenging jobs, language is still a barrier to hurdle. So that was a good segue for our topic tonight. We will talk about migration and how are we affected with the recent policy changes with Canada. So just a brief backgrounder, there are over 338,000 migrant workers in Canada. The number has more than doubled since 2006. Here in Toronto, the number of migrant workers increased 237% between 2006 to 2012, as Canada increasingly relies on a workforce of transnational workers, migrant workers with temporary status. An industry of third-party for-profit recruiters has emerged to match workers with jobs in Canada. Just recently, the Metcalf Foundation published a report with our guest tonight, who headed that, Innovation Fellow Faye Faraday, who examined migrant workers' experiences of recruitment and analysis whether the existing legal model can adequately protect low-wage migrant workers against recruitment abuse. So the title of the book is called Profiting from the Precarious: How Recruitment Practices Exploit Migrant Workers. So we will let her discuss about that. But we also have another guest, Amar Bhatia. Amar Bhatia is with the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, a network of migrant workers, activists, and advocates. And he is also a fellow and visiting professor at Osgoode Hall Law School. So, hello.
Hi, Faye and Amar.
Hi, Ria, Ish, and Louie. How are you doing?
Yes, we're good. We're good. How are you doing?
Good.
Good. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak with you two live here on Radio Migrante.
No, thank you for inviting us.
Mm-hmm.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, so we mentioned the title of the book, Profiting from the Precarious, and Metcalf Foundation published that last April 8th, I believe, last Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right.
Yes. Can you tell us more with the listeners in mind? How can you explain that? What are the basic points with the research?
Well, what this research does is it focuses on the treatment of migrant workers and how they come into Canada through the different private recruitment streams. What happens to them as they come in? A couple of years ago, I wrote another report for the Metcalf Foundation that looked at how the different temporary migration streams create real conditions of vulnerability and insecurity for migrant workers. And in the course of that, I identified recruitment as one of the areas that is of most pressing concern because it starts the whole process. It creates the conditions that end up coloring the whole rest of workers' experience while they're in Canada. Now, back in 2009, there was a lot of exposure around the kind of exploitation, the kind of recruitment abuses that were happening for live-in caregivers. And live-in caregivers in Ontario organized around that and were able to get a law passed that banned all recruitment fees for live-in caregivers. The law applies only to live-in caregivers, not to the other groups of migrant workers. But it is supposed to completely prohibit all recruitment fees for live-in caregivers. And so I wanted to see what was actually happening on the ground, because I was hearing repeatedly that caregivers were continuing to pay huge fees. So this research actually disclosed or revealed that at this point 2/3 of live-in caregivers have continued to pay thousands of dollars in recruitment fees even after the law was put in place. Typically, they're paying $3,500 to $5,000 plus airfare in recruitment fees, but those fees can go up much higher than that. They can go up to as much as $12,000 for one individual caregiver. And all of that is completely contrary to the law. Now, at the same time, I did a Freedom of Information request to see what was happening on the government enforcement side. And since the law came into place across the entire province since 2010, the government has only recovered $12,100 in recruitment fees. So you can see that the gap between what the law promises and what's actually happening on the ground is enormous. Mm-hmm. But there's another part to that as well, and you'll recall that right at the beginning I said that the law applies only to live-in caregivers. But what our research showed was that all the other low-wage migrant workers in all the other sectors in Ontario, whether it's food processing, agriculture, cleaning, restaurants, hotels, construction, you name it, the workers in all those other sectors are also being targeted for enormous recruitment fees. They're paying $4,000 to $10,000 each to get into the province, and they're all these workers are working in minimum wage jobs. So the degree of exploitation is vast, and this research really wanted to highlight what is happening on the ground and the real distance between what we think should be happening and what is actually happening.
Mm-hmm. And for Amar, I guess you're working with Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. Any glaring experience that you worked on a case that you can share with us listeners as well?
Experience that in relation to the fees?
Yeah.
Well, there's been different cases that different members of the Alliance have worked on, and Caregivers Action Center is one of the Alliance members. Also, Justicia, or Justice for Migrant Workers, Parkdale Legal Services as well, and other groups. And there's been cases of fees being charged. One of the Alliance members actually spoke on the panel at the launch of Phase Report last week, and was talking about a recruiter who was going around and threatening different workers in Leamington about paying fees, and then after paying fees to pay more fees to apply for labor market opinions, and sometimes in the thousands of dollars when people can go online and fill out these forms themselves for $150 or something like that. So this is something that that workers organized around, and they actually marched against this sort of abuse by recruiters. But I think one of the important things that Phase Report brings up is that the system shouldn't just rely on workers who are often made vulnerable by these immigration laws and labor laws. It shouldn't rely on workers to make sure that the system is working, but that there should be a proactive enforcement, which is one of the recommendations in Faye's report.
Mm-hmm. And maybe Faye can unpack that proactive system. What do you recommend for the province of Ontario in particular to do?
Well, the way the law works right now, as Mar said, is that it relies entirely on individual migrant workers coming forward and filing complaints against their employers and recruiters. And that is literally impossible to do. One of the things that I have to just back up and tell you a bit, just to emphasize the difficulty here, when we talk about these fees in thousands of dollars in Canadian dollars, it's so much more astonishing when it's converted into the worker's home currency. So, for example, if it's converted into pesos that Filipino workers would be earning at home, the fees are equivalent to about 3 years of the entire wages that someone would be earning. With the result that workers are having to borrow money to pay these recruitment fees. They can't borrow them from banks because they're so high, and so they often end up borrowing either from the recruiters themselves or from informal money lenders. And so they come to Canada under this massive debt owed to informal money lenders and recruiters. And where the law expects them to come forward and file complaints, it's completely unrealistic, because even if they file complaints, they still need to pay back that debt. And so it really is an insurmountable barrier. What the report recommends is to try and remove this problem from the front end instead of trying to do damage control after the fact. And there's a couple of other provinces that have taken a different approach, and that's to license all recruiters at the front end to make sure that their practices are clean, that they're complying with the no fees law. The laws also require, and they'd have a public register of all the licensed recruiters. They require the recruiters to disclose everybody that they use as partners, affiliates, helpers to help recruit workers. Everybody in their supply chain, whether they're in Canada or overseas, would be identified so they know who is doing what, and they would hold the recruiter here responsible for any misdeeds in that supply chain. And they also require recruiters to put up a big security deposit, $10,000 or $20,000, so that there's money available to pay back the worker if they've been charged illegal fees. At the same time, the proactive system requires all employers who are hiring migrant workers to be registered with the government. And that also puts some accountability up at the front end, because it requires employers to show that they're complying with the law, that they're complying with employment standards before they can be registered to hire a migrant worker. And it means that the government has a complete database of every employer in the province who is hiring migrant workers, which means that they actually have the information to be able to go out and proactively enforce the law, to do audits in sectors where they hear there's problems happening, to go out and do sweeps and make sure that everyone, the employers and the recruiters, are following the law, instead of putting that onus on a very vulnerable worker to come forward and complain.
Yes, I have a question, Faye, or maybe Kuya Louie, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question for Faye. Hi, Faye, this is Louie.
Hi, Louie.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
I was just listening to the discussion, and I heard that you're talking about the recruitment fees amounting to like $3,500 to $5,000.
And much higher than that.
And much higher than that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, for the benefit of our listeners, mostly our caregivers, what are the legal fees, actually?
They should be zero.
It should be zero.
Legally, it should be zero. There should be no fees.
Oh, okay. So that's...
And so, recruiters in Ontario are prohibited from charging any fees to place a worker in a job.
Okay.
And so all of those fees are improper.
A follow-up question, Faye. You're saying that zero fees, that's here in Canada, right? We're saying that they shouldn't
in Ontario.
In Ontario. Mm-hmm. But did you have any study that these monies that were actually spent, they actually came from their sending countries? That they actually were the ones who charged these caregivers?
Sometimes what often happens is that there's a recruiter agent in Canada. Sometimes there's a recruiter agent overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And what we've seen over the years is that the more that they try and regulate recruiters in Canada, they try and collect the money before the worker comes into the country. But sometimes the money is paid overseas. Sometimes a couple of installments are paid overseas, and then the rest are paid in Canada. And sometimes the entire amount is paid to a recruiter in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And what workers are saying is that often they're not provided with receipts for the payments because the recruiters don't want to leave a paper trail, or sometimes the receipts completely misrepresent what the payment was for. For example, they'll say that the payment was for training or for the preparation of resumes, when in fact there was no training provided whatsoever. There were no resumes required, that the fee was in reality just for matching someone with a job. And that fee for a job is improper. That is against the law in Ontario.
I have a question for Amar. Amar, what's the difference between recruitment and human trafficking, and when is recruitment become human trafficking, and vice versa?
Well, I think, and I believe Faye addresses this in the report as well, but human trafficking and recruitment, one of the things that people point to as a difference usually is the issue of consent. So that someone may not be consenting to trafficking, whereas they're going along with recruitment. Also, with recruitment, maybe that's a process that starts and that it stops, but trafficking is something that will go on even after arriving to a country and after getting a job, and it's an ongoing exploitation. But different approaches to the issue. For instance, some of the situations, I believe, in Faye's research and in other cases, the recruitment would fall under the definition of trafficking. But I believe people have made an important distinction, which is that really some of the issues around trafficking is that it makes it seem as though these conditions that workers are coming under are exceptions to the rule. Mm-hmm. But Faye's research in her report, also the research of Robin Rodriguez and the Gaia McGovern, they all show that these aren't really exceptions, but these are the rules. These are the official rules of the system, and so what people, I think, are urging is that it not be seen as something exceptional under human trafficking, but that these be seen as immigration law issues, as labor law issues, employment law issues, and that they be addressed that way, not in an exceptional sense of human trafficking, but looking at the entire system, and also what forces people to move in the wider context, such as the trade laws and different subsidies that force subsistence farmers to move, for instance, in the North American context, but also trade imbalances and foreign debt in the Filipino context.
How can advocacy organizations like Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, and I believe also Migrante Ontario is part of the advocacy as well. How can these organizations help migrant workers struggle for their rights? Maybe either Faye or Amar can answer this question.
I think that these organizations have a really important role to play in bringing these issues forward, in helping get migrant workers' voices out there, to be able to create the space for migrant workers to tell their story, to advocate for themselves. And I think that the way that these groups are working together in coalition is really important, because it's not just one group of workers that is being mistreated in this way. As I was saying, the research is clear that this is happening right across all the different economic sectors, all low-wage workers, regardless of what formal temporary migration stream they've come under or what country they've come from, are all facing the same patterns of exploitation. And I think it's through organizations like the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, through organizations like Migrante, that workers are being able to come together and work collectively to create change.
And we're almost at the end of our interview section, but maybe we can ask a final message from Amar and Faye. And how do we or how do the listeners get in touch with Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, as well as with the Metcalf Foundation?
Well, just to in terms of a final message and also what people can do, there's an action tomorrow with the Decent Work, Decent Lives campaign of the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change and Workers Action Center. And Decent Work, Decent Lives is having a demonstration at 12 p.m. tomorrow, that's Monday, at Queen and Bay, the intersection of Queen and Bay, and they're meeting up just outside the Starbucks. And it's going to be outside one of the richest temp agencies in Canada, and the demonstration is part of the minimum wage campaign and Decent Work, Decent Lives. So people can go tomorrow at noon to Queen and Bay, and they can also sign the petition about Decent Work, Decent Lives and to tell their MPPs about the current Bill 161 and the changes that need to be made to the proposed Ontario Immigration Act. And our website is www.migrantworkersalliance.org, migrantworkersalliance.org. And they can find out about the demonstration tomorrow and the petition and different campaigns we have to make immigration to Ontario a reality for everyone, not just for who's considered a skilled worker right now.
Okay. And what about Faye? Yes?
In terms of the Metcalf Foundation, one of the things that I think is important, a message that's important coming out of this report, is that we need to look at the whole system that is creating this real precariousness of temporary labor, and look at why workers are not being able to come directly with full status. It's the creation of this incredibly precarious temporary workforce, and who's profiting from it. That is the bigger question that is being asked. Looking at it through recruitment gives one eye into it, but we really need to have that much bigger discussion. In order to get the report, you can get a copy of the report from the website, which is www.metcalffoundation.com. That's METCALF foundation.com, and you can download the report for free from the website.
Yep, go ahead. Hi, Ish, go ahead. Okay, so I have one last question, actually, Amar and Faye. It's just, it wonders me. Can you explain to me, either the two of you, the Bill 146 and the Bill 161? It's been popping up on the news, but maybe for the listeners, a very brief definition of these two. What are the difference?
Sure, I can. For Bill 146, what that bill would do is it would extend the existing law to protect not just caregivers, but all migrant workers. So that is a preliminary step. That is a step in the right direction, but it doesn't get you all the way there, because it doesn't it doesn't create the proactive enforcement that I was talking about. Bill 161 is the Ontario Immigration Act, and part of what that would do is it would give the government the discretion, if they want to create registries, but it's again not. It doesn't go as far as the protection that's provided in the full proactive regimes that I was talking about. So the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change has some analysis of both those bills on their website. And Mara, if you want to add anything on there.
Yeah, definitely. People can find out about Bill 146 and Bill 161 on our website, and I agree. Basically, Bill 146 does expand the prohibition of charging fees from caregivers to all migrant workers, but it still relies on people to complain instead of the best practices in the country. And Bill 161, which is going to set up Ontario's Immigration Act, this doesn't have any room for people who are so-called low-skilled workers, who are actually helping to build the province in farming, in caregiving, in construction, and in services. So even though the government consulted with community groups in 2010 and said they wanted their Canada-Ontario Immigration Act to have a long-term vision that's informed by anti-racism, this current bill is not cutting it in terms of making a place for everyone to come and immigrate through Ontario's provincial nominee program.
Okay, maraming salamat. Thank you very much, Amar Bhatia and Faye Faraday Faze from Metcalf Foundation, a human rights and labor lawyer, and Amar Bhatia, who is a visiting professor at Osgood Hall Law School, as well as he does work at Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. So maraming salamat. Thank you very much once again for guesting here at Radyo Migrante.
Okay, thank you.
Salamat. Thank you for having us.
You're very welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So yun po, si Amar Bhatia at si Faye Faraday, na sila po ang nagsulat nung report na nilabas ng Metcalf Foundation nung nakaraang Martes. So siguro base sa talakayan natin ngayong gabi, Ish at saka Kuya Louie, anong observation ninyo in terms of how the interview went?
Yeah, I think we still have to go back to the question for who is this policies made for. Because right now, since 2006, the migrant workers population has doubled until now, and such agencies or recruitment entities or bodies have continued to profit from migrant workers, considering that they don't have benefits, they're not entitled to other things that citizens of Canada are entitled to. So we actually need a real enforcement of such proactive strategies that Metcalf Foundation has recommended with that report. And probably with Kuya Louie on the perspective of migrant workers.
Yung report kasing sinasabi dito ni Faye, naka-concentrate siya dun sa recruitment bilang isa sa mga yung pressing concern na sinasabi niya, no. Ang maganda dito ay pinag-aaralan ng report nito kung ano talaga ang trato sa mga migrante, no. Lalo na itong mga exorbitant fees na ito. Ito naman talaga yung malaking isang malaking bahagi ng nahihirapan ng ating mga nagpupunta rito, no. Isa nga dun sa mga nakausap natin kahapon, talagang totoo ito, $3,500 to $5,000 ay napakalaking pera. Tapos pagdating dito ay wala pa silang trabaho talaga na eksakto, no.
Maganda yan. May dadagdag ako, Kuya. Yeah. So maganda yan kasi may mga in-interview tayo sa labas sa Pulso ng Migrante. So mapakikinggan natin sila
kung ano po ang kanilang karanasan sa pamumuhay dito sa Toronto. Magandang gabi po. Ito po si Rhea muli sa Radyo Migrante sa CHRY 105.5 FM, your leading source for diversity. So ngayon po maririnig natin ang pulso ng mga kababayan po nating migrante Pilipino dito po sa Toronto. So kaharap ko po ngayon ay siguro po magpakilala po kayo. Ano po ang pangalan nyo at ano po ang trabaho nyo dito sa Toronto?
Magandang hapon po. Ako si Selly. 6 na buwan na po ako nakarating dito sa Toronto. Medyo dismayado sa nararanasan ko ngayon. Medyo talaga dismayado ako. Mabuti na lang at naka-join ako sa isang grupo na na-expose ako ngayon para ma-lessen yung depression ko dahil nagkaroon na ako ng depression ng 5 buwan. Hindi ako lumalabas, wala akong kilala, ayaw kong mag-join sa tao at saka ayaw dahil na rin sa expectation ko na talagang mataas masyado yung expectation ko pag sinabing Canada. Tapos ngayon, pagdating ko dito, ang dami, walang nasunod doon. Halos may nasunod doon sa trabaho ko, sa oras. Ay, hindi masyado sa oras, merong konting pagkakamali doon sa oras. At lalo na yung sa working condition ko na dalawa ang amo, na dito na lang sinabi nung dumating ako.
Speaking of working conditions, ano po yung trabaho nyo dito?
Live-in caregiver po ang in-applyan natin. Tapos, nung dumating ako dito, nung nasa airport na po ako, sinundo pa ako ng agency at sinabi niya na hindi pa available yung amo ko kasi wala pa yung bata at ililipat muna ako doon sa friend niya, nangangailangan pero paswisweldohan ako. Tapos habang naghihintay ako ng 1 buwan, doon ko na lang nalaman na 2 pala ang magiging amo ko. Kumbaga sharing na tinatawag nila. So, doon na ako nagkaroon ng withdrawal sa tao, sa lahat. Tapos nawalan ako ng trust dahil unang-una wala akong kilala dito. Wala akong alam na tawagan, wala akong alam na tatakbuhan. except na dati akong may grupo sa Hong Kong, tapos tinawagan ko at nahanapan ko yung grupo dito. At ngayon pa lang, isang migrante sa Hong Kong. At ngayon pa lang, 1 buwan pa lang akong aktibo. So, ibig sabihin 5 buwan akong nagtago. Sa depression ko, nagtago talaga ako sa kwarto ko nang hindi ako lumalabas sa takot.
Binanggit nyo na live-in caregiver kayo nung pumasok dito. May binayaran po ba kayo?
Malaki. Malaki ang binayaran. Pag sinabing Canada, talagang malaki ang babayaran mo. Malaki ang babayaran mo, babayad ka ng Hong Kong dollar, 1,000, ang pinag-uusapan dyan, 1,000 Hong Kong dollar. Mas malaki pa po ang babayaran natin dito sa Canada. Babayad ka ng LMO natin na sinasabi nila bago yung job order mo at ang visa mo. Umaabot na po ng, yung binayaran ko pa dito, inaabot ng 3,500 bago ako makakuha ng LMO na yan at job order. At yung visa, doon na yun po sa Hong Kong, bumabayad din po ako ng halos 10,000 Hong Kong dollar po ang pinag-uusapan. So, ibig sabihin, 2 agency po. Wala namang connection yung agency ng Hong Kong at saka dito. Walang tie-up, pero ikaw na yung bahalang maghanap ng resource mo para makarating dito sa Canada.
Ngayon po, sinabi nyo na involved kayo sa isang grupo, ano? Ano ngayon yung masasabi nyo na ngayon na involved kayo? Any further actions? Kumbaga, sa tingin nyo na makakatulong sa mga kababayan natin, kumbaga pa sa mga kababayan natin na nakakaranas ng ganitong sitwasyon ng gaya sa inyo?
More awareness po para doon sa mga bagong darating pa lang. Bago sila pumunta dito, alamin nila, maging aware sila sa lahat-lahat at magtanong-tanong sila sa mga nandito na. Magtanong-tanong sila po kung ano yung status, yung ano natin, yung babayaran, yung ano. Kasi alam ko, hindi ka talaga makakarating ng Canada kung hindi ka babayad ng ganon. Sinusugal po natin yan. Pero para po, yung sa akin na lang po, oo, susugalan talaga yan. Kasi yun yung aim mo. Pero ang kailangan po natin ngayon is yung awareness talaga. Yung campaign natin sa awareness na ganito yung daratnan mo, hindi yung talaga ang ganda-ganda, super ganda-ganda. Yung expectation mo na sinasabi nila na pag ganito yung trabaho mo, ganito lang, hindi po. Meron po tayong amo na nagfa-follow talaga. Meron pong hindi. Kagaya din yan ng ibang bansa. So, ang inaano ko lang po, more awareness at saka more po yung ano natin, i-expand po natin yung ano natin, yung TOS experience po natin na hindi lahat ng Canada ay hindi talaga yung sinasabi mo na talagang super talaga na dito ka na talaga, ito na yung pinakamaganda, ito na. Kasi kung minsan baka hindi mo rin madala, baka pagdating mo dito yung frustration at saka depression na kagaya ko, kung wala yung migrante na sinasamahan ko ngayon, hindi ko rin po alam kung ano yung magiging sitwasyon ko kung nakakulong pa ba ako sa bahay ngayon at nagkakaroon. Hindi kasi nararamdaman ng depression eh. So, buwan-buwan nagkakasakit ako. Hindi ko alam depression na pala yun. So, kailangan awareness talaga po. Awareness lang yung inaano ko. At lumapit po. Marami tayong migrante dyan. Marami tayong association dyan na pwedeng pasukan.
Maraming salamat.
Salamat po.
Okay, so yun po isa sa mga puso na migrante na i-feature na we're trying to feature starting actually today. Tapos yung mga na-interview po natin kahapon ay ipapatugtog po natin siya next week kasi po unfortunately we're running out of time pero next week po ipapatugtog po natin yung the rest of the interviews that we had. So go ahead, Ish.
Pero madami pa tayong announcements.
Meron pa tayong announcements, of course. So go ahead.
Yeah, so with regards to what we talked about tonight, human trafficking, the potential for environmental devastation from the oil industry, and the plight of homeless persons will be held in this year's ecumenical Good Friday Walk for Justice on April 18, 2014. So it quotes the three focus stations this year offer us the opportunity to recognize, lament, and be empowered to transform how marginalized people and God's good creation are currently devastated by the corporate, consumer, and personal greed that sells out thousands and even millions of lives and our collective future in the name of short-term profit for only a few. So that's according to Reverend Brian McIntosh, a longtime member of the walk planning team. So the walk begins at 2 p.m. at the Church of the Holy Trinity beside Eden Center. Participants will visit 3 stations, or I believe 4. They added another one, representing each of the issues. And it will approximately end at 4:30 with a closing ritual and a simple meal of soup and bread. So participants are suggested to bring their own cups or mugs. So this is planned with different groups such as the Anglican, Mennonite, Presbyterian, Roman Catholic, and United Churches, and Christian Peacemaker teams. That's on April 18th, Friday, Good Friday.
Okay, ang susunod po ay Radyo Migrante is inviting everyone to join them in the 6th year celebration of Cordillera Day in Toronto, Canada, and they are looking forward for your presence to join them and celebrate the event with cultural presentations, dances with the beat of the gongs, and listen to their speakers. Dinner will also be served before the program. There will be no entrance fee, so donations in the form of cash, food, raffle, prizes, etc. is very much appreciated. So for more inquiries, please contact Jenny Owatan, Bridge Cosme Dangay, Geralda Cobselen, and Marivic Calagui. These numbers will be posted doon po sa Radyo Migrante Facebook page, Facebook event page natin.
And tomorrow, April 14th, Monday, join us for $14 minimum wage here in Ontario. The campaign to raise the minimum wage will be rallying outside one of the richest temp agencies in Canada. Temp workers get paid 40% less than permanent workers doing the same job, often at the minimum wage. A recent Ministry of Labor enforcement blitz showed that 3 out of 4 temp agencies were violating basic employment standards, as we talked about earlier. Ontario workers need decent wages, working conditions, and a decent minimum wage. So you can go to the website raisetheminimumwage.ca, and tomorrow we can go join the group holding an action there at Queen and Yonge. So also you can support decent work, decent lives, and tell your MPPs to support minimum wage, temp, unionized, and migrant workers. Sign the petition at decentworkdecentlives.ca.
Okay, so maraming salamat po at patuloy po kayo nakikinig dito lamang sa Radyo Migrante sa CHRY 105.5 FM, your leading source for diversity. Up next po ay si Roy Green and Lady Soul of Odyssey. So, may shoutouts ba tayo?
Yes, we have.
Go ahead.
Shoutouts to Rosan, Maru, Terrell, Elena, and everyone else who's listening tonight or this morning in the Philippines.
Maraming salamat po sa lagi po na ninyong pagsusubaybay sa ating Radyo Migrante. So,
at maraming salamat, Kuya Louie, for joining us tonight.
Yes, Kuya Louie, ay, sandali lang po, naka-on po yung ayon. Go ahead.
Maraming salamat din sa napakagandang diskusyon. Kulang nga lang oras, pero pag-uusapan pa yan.
Kaya may rason para makinig next week.
Oo, may part 2.
Exactly. So maraming salamat po muli at magandang gabi po sa ating lahat.